As always, we're going to be talking about rock, metal, and all that good stuff. Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get some more level on this microphone so you can hear me properly. This is another one in this live series of the quarantine mix sessions, as it were. Welcome, everybody. If you saw the stream on Friday, we are following up from that. That was mixing metal. Specifically, it's a female-fronted metal band, kind of like Evanescence-y, kind of, but more like Paramore. It's kind of got that fast metal thing going on. But what we're going to do tonight is quickly follow up on that and get into the topic of mastering and how we do that with what we already have. So, first things first, roll the intro! I do wish that intro was longer because I'm trying to enjoy a nice biscuit. Anywho, tonight's two big jobs are going to be tweaking a mix and mastering. So, we have a new project here, which is going to be our mastering project. This is how I now do mastering in Reaper, where I used to do this thing where I would have a mix, I would be happy with it, and I would render it as a 24-bit wave, and then I would drop it in a separate project in Reaper. Nice, tidy way of working, keeps things separate. But I now have this thing. Let's just play you a little bit of the mix so far, because I did make some tweaks to it earlier today, just subtle things. And it sounds even more brutal and big, and I'm going to show you that. Now, it's a little bit, in hindsight, a little bit kind of mid-forward now, this mix, which is the kind of thing that in a mastering situation is relatively fixable, because on reflection, I think it's a decent mix that I'm happy with now. Everything kind of balances out. It is a little strong in the high mid, shall we say, just overall, but everything kind of fits. So, this is where it gets really clever, because what I did, and I'm just going to delete this out here for a second, this is where I got really clever. Because what Reaper can do now is if I find the file, one second, I'm just going to do this on another screen quickly, so I'm not showing you all my folders I don't want you to see. Let's find, mixes, Disenchanted. So, this is the folder where I've got that Reaper project, and I called it, there we go, Disenchanted Porcelain 2020 mix video.rpp. If I drop that in, I can actually drop that in onto a track now. I can drop a project into another project, which is something that's quite new in Reaper. Now, I can either choose to just open the project, open it as a new tab, so you can open tabs as if it was like a Chrome session. You can actually open multiple, or the button we want on the left is Insert Project as Media Item. This is where it gets really clever. Now, in this case, it just drops it in. That's because I did this earlier today. What it would normally do is it would normally open up the project separately in a new tab, and it renders it out as a 32-bit floating point wave file, then closes it again and drops that in here, almost like a proxy. Which means I have a perfectly set up 32-bit floating point version of that project now, just as a wave file, without me having to know what formats I want or anything like that. It's just done, which is great. And that's sub-projects. Sub-projects in Reaper are a new thing that are very, very useful. Now, one thing that I've noticed is right at the very end here, it just kind of ends because that's where the last sound clip is in the Reaper file. So what I'm going to do now is this is a perfect opportunity to open the project up. So all you have to do to open a project up in a sub-project is I just double-click this, and we're going to give this a minute, and it's going to open up, because it's now got to open gigabytes on gigabytes worth of samples and all the VSTs and all that kind of stuff. Still doesn't take long on a fairly decent computer. Doesn't take any longer than just opening it up as a normal project, because that's really what Reaper considers it to be. Loading complete, done. Okay. So what was happening there is at the very end, it was just kind of not ending, because that's where, as far as Reaper's concerned, that's where the project ends, because there's no more audio. So what I'm going to do, just to be clever, is I'm going to insert an empty item on the next track down that just goes on a few seconds, just so that the reverb ends. There we go. So it sounds silly. That blank piece of audio there isn't doing anything. But that means when we go back to the mastering project, it'll re-render this and it'll make it that little bit longer. So, on to talking about some of the changes that I've made. So if you watch the mix session on Friday, then this will make some sense to you. If not, this will not make too much sense. But hang in there. This is only going to be 5 minutes. Because I didn't make any big changes, really. First thing I did is I added After True Iron, and I'm going to make sure Restream is on here so you can hear this. This is Slate's virtual bus compressors, and usually when you pull it up, it looks a bit more like this. And the compressors go in this order: the SSL, the Focusrite Red, and the Fairchild. There we go. So I've got them in kind of the other way round. So I've got them as Fairchild, then the Red, then the SSL. Question in chat, do I monitor with these headphones or are they just for the broadcast? Depends on the day. I'm personally quite comfortable with mixing on these. It's something I do quite a lot. In fact, it's something I do most of the time. I tend to track and record on my big Adam A7X and Sub-8s setup that's at the studio. And I do tend to do most of my mixing on the HD650s. You do need a really good headphone amp, and you need to be really, really comfortable in knowing how your headphones respond. Also, having a copy of SonarWorks running all the time really helps. Between those... Yeah. Between those three things, between really knowing my headphones, having SonarWorks, and a lot of the time, especially 5 or 6 years ago, I was forced to do a lot of mixing on headphones because I didn't have the ideal studio setup, or I wasn't there, or I had a lot of work to do for film which needed to be done on the day. I really had to get to know these. And so I'm really quite comfortable mixing on headphones. Quite often I will do all my mixing on these, go back to the studio with the project, and listen on monitors and make a few subtle tweaks based on what I'm hearing. But generally speaking these days, they're not that different from each other. So yes, I am using these just for the purposes of the broadcast, but I'm quite happy working on these because it's what I'm used to. So, moving on. This bus compressor, the first thing I'll say is that the Fairchild, the top one, makes everything really bright and really mid-present. So if I turn this on and off during the mix, you'll really hear that. Listen to this. So every time these VUs lit up, that was when this top one was on. And you might have noticed there that everything suddenly really came right forward, and the vocals and the guitars and everything really just stood out. And the real Fairchild compressor has something like 14 valves and about 6 transformers in it. And that's not an exaggeration. It's a huge thing. It's a massive technological wonder of the ages. They're incredible. But it's something that when I turned that on, that's when I went back and made a few subtle mix tweaks to accommodate. And also I've got this FG Red compressor, which is really going kind of crazy for a bus compressor. Especially near the end when there's extra guitars and everything. But that's at 4:1 with the auto release. That's with the high pass filter taking all the bass out of it, because I noticed that whenever I got to a section with real low bass, the mix felt like it dipped with that. And then it's actually backed off to less than 50% that. And then the SSL bus compressor, which everybody swears by, I don't use very much. Mine's really tickling it and just taking about a dB off the mix. And again, the super low stuff gets through. I'll turn all of these on and off. So one thing you'll notice when I turn on all these bus compressors is the low end isn't as full and fat anymore. It's kind of, what's the word? It's kind of thin, but it's also really well controlled. The high end, the mid range is much more in your face. And that's all okay, because in the mastering, that's what I was going to say, is that that's the kind of thing that will now... Come on, how to explain it? That I can deal with overall EQ changes at the master stage. But the actual gluing of the bus compression meant that I had a much clearer idea of things like the lead guitar was generally just too loud. This what is the difference between real guitar effects and computer program effects? Not a lot, really. Just depends on application and how you're using them. If we're talking about analog effects, they're more difficult to replicate in the digital domain. But if we're talking about, like, say, a delay stomp box compared to a delay program, they're not that different, really. So, yeah, that's a hard one to answer on a mastering video. It's kind of off topic for today. So yeah, this lead guitar was too much. There we go. So let's look. So yeah, I took the low end out of that lead and dipped some super high end out, although I gave it a lift. Also found that the drums were still a little bit flat sounding, so I added a second sample. This is how the drums were. Oh yeah, the toms were distorting. The Blackbird toms were actually clipping at the sample level, which was weird. Sound of the music's a bit low. Okay. Let's see if that works. There we go. Yeah, the Blackbird tom samples were actually clipping, which was really weird. I think it was those ones. And so I switched them out for the classic. Was it a classic? Which ones are they? Blackbird Yamahas. Yeah. Whichever ones I switched them out for weren't clipping. Might have been the Chris Lord Algaes. No, it can't have been. Whichever ones it was that I was using were clipping and the new ones weren't anyway, so. In the mix, they were just a bit weak, so I added in this snare sample, and that snare sample's from the Black album. It's David, one of our regular viewers, is on he's watching on Twitch. Apparently Twitch is better. Unfortunately, I don't have a big viewership on Twitch, which is why, you know, most people are watching on YouTube. But yeah, so that added in with the drums. Just gives the snare some width. Bass I didn't change. And the other thing with the rhythm guitars, I gave them a bit of a volume boost, but cut out a bit from around 1K and a bit from 3.5K. I'm pretty sure the same guy that asked me what Reaper skin I'm using yesterday on Friday, it's the default skin. This is Reaper 6's default. I don't use skins. I don't move everything around once I'm comfortable with it. There's no good reason for it for me. The keys, I took a bit of a big chunk out of 1K in the low end. Again, this was all just tidying that mix up from Friday. Just making it a little cleaner. Oh, and the main vocal, I put a second plate on to make it a little, what's the word? Yeah, I put lustrous plates on the vocal as a second plate. There we go. So, yeah. Although that's fair enough if you missed the response. That's cool. But yeah, I mean, I don't do things like skins on Reaper or pretty much anything really. I leave everything as default because the guys who make stuff like Reaper, they spend years deciding what's the most efficient for users to use, only for people to then go, no, I prefer it this way. I'm like, no, hang on, they're doing the design this way for a reason. So I stick with that decision, and it seems to have worked for me. So anyway, those are the things that I've changed. And so it's basically cutting a few frequencies here and there, making more space. The kick as well, the main kick sample had a lot of sub in it. Now it really doesn't. Oh. That's weird. 1 second. The snare, what's coming out of... sample out of snare top. Why was that going out of? That's better. The snare top sample was coming out of the kick port. Yeah, so the kick had loads of sub in it, which I got rid of up to 80 hertz, and I pushed loads of this 1.6K on the Neve. I mean, that looks wrong, but what you have to understand is the kick samples that I have were very sub-heavy and didn't have very much information in that 1.6K region. So because they're very 6K heavy, what you've got to think of, especially with a Neve filter, is that 80 hertz there is not a dead cut at 80 hertz. It's a very gentle slope saying anything below 80 hertz, start to filter it off. Start gently to remove it. So there's stuff still there at 50 hertz, 30 hertz, just less and less and less. And also, the samples from the Andrew Wade Drumshotz have the rest of that low end there, which means that those two together, I've got all the low end I need there. So the drums now sound badass. So. I might pull the backing vocals up another dB as well. And let's consider this mix done. Now the thing with sub projects is I can just close this now. When it asks me to save it, I say yes, and it will start rendering. Cancel. Let's just that's probably killed it. The reason I said cancel is that had restream on the master, which is how you're hearing it. Let's just clear this and try again. Oops. So, yeah, if I left restream on while that was rendering, that was going to come through to the output going really fast and sound absolutely horrible, which is something that you guys generally won't have to deal with. That's because of the way that I'm doing this mix. Restream is a really clever plugin that can send the audio through to the OBS streaming software so that I don't have to do any awful routing using any external anything. So if I turn off that Restream plugin right there, and then close this, save it, yes. There we go. This will now render that entire song for me. And then we'll get on to the topic of mastering. So, any more questions in chat whilst I drink my Captain Morgan's rum and lemonade? This is going to be rendering for us for the next minute and a half, so if you've got anything that you want to add in, now's a good time. I do love this laptop. This is one of the new 6-core Intel beasts that it's managing to render this whole mix out at 2 times the speed of sound whilst doing a stream without any noticeable stuttering. I think that's really quite impressive. Yeah, it's interesting that the audio quality would be better on Twitch. I suppose if it is kind of what's the word? Re-encoding it, that could cause issues maybe. It's also possible that, you know, you're definitely watching the YouTube stream in 1080p, because I know that by default, because of this whole quarantine lockdown situation, a lot of companies like YouTube are now, by default, making your stream come through at 480p, which is a much lower bitrate, which also has much lower audio quality, which for most people they don't even notice. So for the few people that do notice, then... Oh, Mage Prometheus is lurking in chat, one of my regulars. Good evening, good evening. Yes, if you go into your options for the video on YouTube, you should be able to find something to do with quality somewhere. There's a little cog for settings, quality, and if you make sure that's on 1080p HD, even if your screen isn't 1080p, that means that your audio quality will be the highest quality. Oh, Lucas, I could answer your question above. I didn't see that one. Apologies. Do I mix into the Fairchild on my master bus, or do I put it on after I mix? I've been known to do both. I'm a bit weird. Is that... Oh, no, there we go. That can extend that out now. I'm a little bit strange in that quite often I'll get to a certain point in a mix without a bus compressor, and then I'll put something like a bus compressor on, see where I'm at. I tend to find that if I've got too much going on the processing on the master bus as I start mixing, it can affect my judgment because I'm not focusing on that, I'm not concentrating on that. I tend to do a lot of the basic mixing without, and then when the mix is really coming together, Then I start adding in things like bus compression, because then I've got beyond the basic stuff, like really trying to get the best tone out of each separate instrument, which can, like, if I'm trying to find a good tone on a bass, for example, I might have loads of low end in there while I'm finding that tone. And then if I've got a bus compressor on and that's slamming the bus compressor, that can affect my judgment negatively. So I do tend to find that just not having one until later helps me out, generally. I'm not a big fan of overly heavily compressed stuff anyway in terms of the mix bus. I do a lot of compression on each separate channel, so I don't find that I tend to need much. So let's have a listen now to... Right, so you can all hear that. That's good. Right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put Ozone on my master track here. And that's not the be-all and end-all of mastering. I'm not just saying, oh, use Ozone, we're done, thank you, bye. But it has tools in it that I very much like. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's say this is a master for Spotify streaming. So the first thing I'm going to do is, it's been recommended to me to have my ceiling, that is the true peak mix ceiling in the maximizer, at -2 decibels, which means that when it gets turned into things like M4A formats, AAC or MP3 or whatever it is that the streaming services use, when it gets turned back into PCM, that is to say a WAV file, which I don't know if you know this, but any compressed audio has to be turned into usable audio before it comes out of your speakers, so it does actually get converted back from whatever that format is into something that the converter can use, which generally is PCM wave. Not necessarily a wave file, but in a format that can then be sent through to speakers, headphones, whatever. And that can cause, if it's really, really loud, peaks to appear that weren't in the file. And by giving yourself this couple of decibels of headroom, you are fairly guaranteed that that's not going to be an issue. So the first thing I like to do before I do any of what I would call serious mastering is do that, add a little bit of a volume push on my maximizer, make sure it's the best quality maximizer, and then go to what I call my kind of default settings, which is to have a little bit of the stereo independence, and then leave that alone for a little while. So this is going to start getting loud, which is why I had already turned down the output for what you guys are going to hear. So if I hit play now, this shouldn't sound much different. There we go. So we can see the limiter just tickling there on some of those heavy tom hits. Let's see what the RMS values were for that. Cool, so the RMS were already hitting -12-ish. We probably don't want to hit it much harder than that in terms of general volume. Hello, Nick. Yes, come to watch a mastering tutorial. Next friend of mine going to their wedding later in the year. So now that's done, the next thing to do is add a reference. So with this being heavy metal, female fronted, I had a look around and found a track that I hope won't get us copyright strike to the channel, and hopefully will mean that we can do this. Am I using RMS over LUFS for any particular reason, or is it just an old habit? Neither. I mean, this is not the be-all and end-all. This is literally the beginning of my journey, and I'm using RMS literally just because it's there. I will use things like LUFS later, but for now, that was just a cursory glance at something that just happened to be in the corner, just to give me a rough idea. I find that RMS is still quite useful as a broad brushstroke, even though LUFS is what is quite often used. I mean, they can be interchangeable. They're not the same thing, and I won't say they are. But let's see. So, Epica. There's Cry for the Moon, the Embrace that something. I should have really read that. I did pull that up. There we go. So, yes, Cry for the Moon, the Embrace that Smothers, Part 4. Wow, that's a hell of a name. So, if I use this on the reference module of this, I'm going to turn it down a few dB to start off with. Just I can see that's going to be louder than what we have. Oh, blimey, yeah. Right, so what I really want is a heavily vocal. Yep, so I'm going to see if this section. Okay, so I'm going to load up a different song from the same album, just because I'm trying to find one that's got kind of a big everything all at once kind of section. Cool, I think that's roughly what I'm looking for. Let's try. Cool, so I'm going to turn down the output for you guys so you don't go deaf, because I've got to crank this to 0 dB now. I'm going to turn my headphones down a little bit. So I'm going to turn this from this back to our song. Okay, good question from my mate Chris in the chat. I watched the last video, the mixing video for this. Any reason I opted for the Archetype Nolly, torn between the Nameless and NTS? Well, firstly, I just hadn't used the Nolly before. I wanted to kind of get to grips with it. And it seemed like for this heavy kind of music, it made more sense to me than the Archetype Tosin Abasi or the Polini. And it was the most versatile as well. The Nameless looks really cool, and I have used that before. But it's kind of a one-trick pony. And also the NTS is really cool, but it's so much gain. And what I actually wanted, and what it turns out that I ended up using, is I ended up using the 3 out of the 4 different amps in the Archetype Nolly on that mix. In the stereo rhythm guitars, one was the heavy one was a less heavy one, and the lead was actually that lead amp, whereas the Nameless would have really not been great for anything other than maybe that right-hand side heavy, crunchy amp, and the NTS might have been, I don't know, the same. I just wanted to try it, really. Same with the Parallax, rather than going with the Dark Glass. I just wanted to try something a little different, and it turns out that they worked perfectly for what I needed. So, first thing I'm going to do is bring our mix up volume-wise a bit. Okay, so it does seem like our mix is really kind of thin in comparison. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Gulfoss, because Gulfoss is going to find any of those horrible mid-frequencies that are really poking out for me. There we go. Someone just joined in chat. Open for any type of questions. Within reason. Yes. So, yeah, I've brought our maximizer up just generally there on the master, just so that we're getting into the same kind of volume range as our reference of that Epica track. And I've now tamed a lot of the track, and we can see in Gulfoss There we go. It's subtle, but all those peaky mids that were there are now being settled. So I think what I'm going to do before I even use any EQ here is I'm going to put Slate's virtual tape machine in after Gulfoss, because I know that'll really bring some of the low end out. Okay, so now I want basically to thicken this mix right up. So let's have a look. I want to use an imager as well. I know that because I want this mix to be nice and wide, but not overly done. So that might be all I need. The mid-range presence thing preset there. So just push the mids wide a bit, push the top wide a little bit, and not do anything to the low end. Where's the vintage EQ? Vintage EQ. Signal routing with Reaper and Total Mix for reamping. Something I can show. No, not really. Not in this stream. I've got an Audience Sono with me which has 3 tracks, and I don't use Total Mix at all. No, sorry. Maybe another time. I've done 3 or 4 different videos about reamping. But all you need to do, actually, I will quickly just show you. If you do a send in Reaper and then go to audio hardware outputs, you just pick the audio hardware output that you want your reamp guitar to go to, and you turn off master send, and that should be about it. And then your sound should be coming out to your reamp box, and that's it. There we go. Try and keep it nice and simple. Another question, don't you think there's a lot of annoying hiss around 5 to 9k in the third amp? That's how 5150s are, that's what they do. You just have to not make the mics be in really, really bright positions. I tend to find that, yeah, I tend to dip a little bit at maybe 3 or 4k on that particular amp, and I actually lift around 12k in a mix, but I don't lift any lower down than that. But yeah, 5150s do have kind of a in that range. That's part of the amp's sound. And yeah, it's not a flaw in the modelling, I can tell you that. It sounds how it's supposed to. So, the vintage EQ is what I think I want. So I want to get 100 Hz and do a subtle low boost. Ah, the untick the master. Yes, yes. Because otherwise it comes out through, yeah, the clean DI comes out through the master output as well. Right. Do I have any thoughts about all-in-one mastering processes like Master Desk or Multimedia One? They're not that different to Ozone. Ozone's kind of an all-in-one mastering processor. I just tend to not use things like that. Not because they're bad, but because, I don't know, using a de-esser on a guitar amp, oh dear, I mean, no, personally I wouldn't, because if you're using a de-esser on something that's pretty much wideband white noise, you may as well have just dipped an EQ there, because I mean, when do you want that amp to make that sound? You either want it or you don't, generally speaking, so a de-esser is supposed to be a momentary thing, so not for me. Let's have a look at Brainworks Master Desk. 1 second. Mastering Desk. Generally, I tend to find that anything that's specifically for mastering as an all-in-one either doesn't do enough or does too much. I mean, Ozone definitely does too much, but that's fine because I don't use a lot of it. So I've boosted the lows here, and suddenly I can hear how everything in the low end, because this says 60 hertz, but it goes this curve goes all the way up past 1K. And you've really got to be careful with the decibels here, because you can go absolutely crazy really quickly with vintage stuff. There we go. So you can see that I've boosted and cut in the low end, but they've done very different things, because the low cut does much more of a specific thing, the low boost does a much more broad thing. Let's see how this sounds with and without the vintage EQ, and then compare it to our reference. Okay, I think we're getting into that range. Listening to it, it sounds like they've just used a nice kind of classic wide EQ and just pushed all the mids there. So that's what I'm going to do, just to see just if that dB or two of push in the 500-ish hertz region, because I am quite bad really in my mixes at scooping around 500 hertz on everything to clear mud out, which means that at the mastering stage I end up putting it all back, but I put it all back on everything equally, which means that the job that I was doing at the time, making space, was the right thing. It's a bit of a weird roundabout, but right, I think we're getting somewhere, because Gulfoss is still, it's dealing with now. One of the issues that I've just noticed is that Gulfoss is really nicely taming a lot of those peaks, but because a lot of those peaks were in the vocal is now sitting back in the mix, and we don't want that. We want the mix to be quite mid-forward. So this is where I'm going to double click on the wave file again. It's going to open up the whole project again for the mix, which if I was working on an album's worth of tracks, this would be really, really useful as a time saver for me, because I could just dive back into a track, make a small tweak, close it again, go back to the master. If I was working with a separate mastering engineer and he came back with these same mix requests, this would just take a lot longer. So this is absolutely fantastic. Let's just might take the tube warmth button out of the Howard Benson on that vocal there and just really richen the mids up in that virtual mix rack. Where's the revival? There we go. And just add some thickness. which again in the main mix might be against my intuition. Oh, restream's off. There we go. Yes, thank you. So that all I've done there is I took, before I'd even really hit play, I took the tube warmth button out of the main vocal, which takes some of the distortion out of the top end. Added a bit of, on the other channel, I added thickness. I'll add some on that additional vocal as well in the, yeah, and there was a re-EQ where there was a low mid dip, which I've just took out. So I'm going to add a bit more kick, because I know on the master quite often the kick gets lost. And on the snare, just add a little bit of 3K poke. Ah, yes, so Chris missed the start of the start of this. So I'm just going to hit cancel on this a sec. So what you can do now in Reaper is a thing called a sub-project, where you can drop in another project as a sub-project, and then when you hit save and close it, it automatically renders that as a 32-bit floating point WAV file and sticks it in as a WAV file, and then when you double-click that later, it reopens that project. Any changes you make, you then save it, and it renders it and sticks it back. So for something like mastering, or working on, I don't know, for a film score, working on songs inside a film score, that's huge, because it's a massive time saver. So what else did I want to change? Not a lot really. That was the main thing, was bring the vocals forward, bring the kick and snare out. So yes, if I close it, will that now render? So I did cancel it from doing the WAV file generation there. Yeah, so that's the thing that is a little bit annoying, is on sub-project mode, every time you hit save, it renders the entire thing out, which if it's going at 20 times speed of sound, that's fine, but when it's going at 2 times and it's a full 5-minute thing, it's So, this is going to take a couple of minutes now that I've made these changes. Oh, another thing that I did is the arpeggiator. There was a keys that went this one. And the timing just wasn't right on the start, so I froze the track down. Unless I have a nice rum drink for the wait, which, funnily enough, I do. So, let's just make a little change. And then I can now close this, save it, yes. And as it saves it, it will re-render it out for me. Oh, no, it's going to do restream. That's why I cancelled it. There we go. I'll just mute it on that side over there this time. Although I must remember when this is finished. If you could hear the guitar then going at like double speed, that's what happens with restream. I'll just show you a little blast of it. It's pretty terrible. I've had this before when I've had things like audio going through hardware inserts and then tried to do full speed bounce, and it just sounds absolutely terrible. It's funny, but bleh. So, any more questions in the chat in this 1 minute and 10? Yeah, Brainworks Master Desk looks kind of nice, but compressor, limiter, EQ, mono maker, and stereo. It seems a little oversimplified. I need a new personal computer. Buddy, this thing is like brand new. This thing's doing the entire mix, like with 100+ plugins, and also doing the live stream at the same time on the same computer. If I was running this on 2 machines, then yeah, sure, but yeah, it's kind of slow because it's doing everything all at once. Anywho, 12 seconds from now. Staple of the British workforce, biscuits. Also, fun fact, right at the end, you need a full-scale piano app for music homework. What, like iOS app or PC or what exactly is it that you're asking? I mean, do you have a MIDI keyboard and you just need sound? Would studying to be a sound engineer help with, say, Reaper, for example? Well, yeah. Studying to do anything arguably helps with that thing. I mean, I know that sounds trite and offhand, but I didn't learn at university how to use Reaper. I did learn the fundamentals of music production, composition, how to put a good performance together, how to do all the business side as well. I learned, but a lot of the recording and mixing basics I learned separately from the DAW that I was using. And then when I discovered Reaper years later, and then found everything I already knew was very easy to put into practice, Reaper made it very easy for me to translate what I could hear in my head into what you hear coming out of the speakers. So, arguably, yes. Well, if you're asking for iOS, I don't really know. I'll have a look later on, but honestly, your best bet might be GarageBand. GarageBand's got quite a good piano in it. In fact, on iPads, GarageBand is actually a lot better than people give it credit for. Moving back to the task at hand. And let's turn it on so you can hear it. It's going to be loud. So I think we're getting there in terms of the master. There's still a little something in there that I can't quite put my finger on. What is it? Come on. Let's try low-end focus. That could be clever. And just... Ah, there we go. Punchy. Bring more of the low-end thump out. think we're getting fairly close to our reference, but if anything, yeah, a bit too much 2K-ish in my track. Yeah, I'm starting to be inclined to agree. Let's just have a look. This is where using Isotope Ozone's equalizer, I can use the Alt button and drag around the frequency spectrum to hear where that extra noise is. Yeah, so I think it's more like 2.5K. That's what I'm being told by that anyway. So let's just see what happens if I just make a very specific EQ cut around there. Right, one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my reference and take that down by a few dB. The Epica track is from 2013, right at the height of the volume wars. And if there's one thing I want to avoid, it's being unnecessarily loud at this point in time. If I can take my reference back down to something that's a sane level, then it's something I'll be quite happy with. I'm going to change track again. Same album, but see if I can find something that's really quite heavy. Don't know if I've picked the wrong album for heavy. We might want to find out. Oh, hello. Baby is good. Yes, my daughter is doing well. She's been making a mess of the house as per usual, and she's now soundly asleep. Alright, so I've turned your volume up at home, listeners, because I'm turning the reference down, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn mine down as well. Funnily enough, turning mine down so I'm not hitting the limiter all the time means that that low end has suddenly come back, so the low end focus could be turned off. I'm going to try Learn Threshold, and I'm going to aim for -12 LUFS with this thing at the bottom. And if I hit play now, this will now tell me how loud it wants me to be. Yes, Major Prometheus in chat. Yes, I I don't dislike Epica, I just never really got them. I do like Nightwish. However, I learnt today through doing a little digging that if I use Nightwish as a reference, YouTube would pretty much destroy me and never let me talk again. Seems that Nightwish's label don't take kindly to them being used in other people's streams. Epica, generally speaking, it seemed like their record label weren't too fussed. I mean, they'll take the money for the video off me, which, for the purposes of this video, I'll just have to live with. But otherwise, yeah, it was allowed to be replayed around the world without being blocked, and that was kind of the main thing for me. So I think Nightwish generally go with more guitar than this, which is why I don't mind having more guitar in my mixes in this Epica track. Ooh. Cool, so what I did there is, you might think when I boosted the highs at 12k, oh, but your track doesn't really need any more high end. But with the vintage EQ, that's very Pultec style, like I was saying about the low end before, that actually starts around 1 kilohertz, and it's a very, 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 very gentle slope. So it just kind of lifts everything and just sounds a little clearer. And of course that's going into this EQ with that dip right there to stop that fizziness and presence from the vocals from killing everything. So let's listen to the song all the way through, see if anything stands out, anything needs fixing, and that might just be it. And all we've used is a magical Gulfoss EQ, a tape machine, a vintage EQ, an equalizer, a stereo imager, and a volume maximizer. That's all. Yeah, that's how mastering kind of goes for me. So let's listen to what hopefully is the final version of Porcelain, the 2020 mix by Disenchanted.
We're just
Ah, there we go. Yep. I turned my microphone off so I could eat biscuits. Apologies, everybody, but the biscuits were necessary. So, I'm going back into the mix. So the two things I noticed, because we're not pushing the output quite as loud as we were, we're not hitting that limiter too hard. Suddenly the kick drum's really, really loud, which actually at plus 4 dB there, I can see why. There we go. You should be able to hear me now. I've turned it on. But yeah, everybody said the same thing at the same time. So yeah, I'm taking the kick down in the mix. I'm just going to look at this bass. Fatten the bass up a bit. See how that affects it. Okay, so I did cut all the low end out of the rhythm guitars. Ooh, yes. Just giving them an extra 20 hertz there on the low end. So this was the rhythm guitars just then. And this is them with it from 100 hertz down to 80. Ooh, suddenly I can feel like chug chug. I like. The keys I'm going to leave without the low end because that can get muddy quick. The other thing I wanted to do was the very end of that vocal originally went really, really... Got to go and moderate Rhett Schultz stream. Oh, cool. Had fun. And the last thing is the very end of the vocal was supposed to be dry. And originally it was, but now I've actually added more layers of vocal goodness. So what I need to do is essentially turn them off at the end. So the send volume for the room needs to go off before the end, and plate 2 also needs to go off. Let's try that. Right, I'll dry it up before that. And I'll do it really suddenly at the word kill you and see if that really makes it hit home. Yes, because that suddenly really dries it up and you'll suddenly go, whoa! So yeah, there's a bit more chug in the low end of the guitars now, there's a bit more fatness in the bass. The kick doesn't need much more low end, but let's just hit save and let that render. And that's quite enough for those biscuits. I had a really bad day yesterday, because after that 3-hour stream, I was really ill, and I was wondering if maybe I'm allergic to meat or something. Just mildly, you know, not like near-death allergy. And so I had a whole day yesterday where I basically spent the day in bed and then tried to eat things like baked potato soup, cornflakes with no meat, obviously. I felt a lot better, and today I've eaten all the biscuits. And let's see if tomorrow I feel yeah. We've not been at a day job at the moment with the whole furlough thing that's going on. I've got time to... Ah, yes, noise. That's what happens with that Restream plugin. I was just talking about biscuits and wheat allergy, so it's not exactly the most important thing in the world. Downside to this being a live stream is that anything that can happen will happen. If I was doing this as something that I was going to edit and put up on the YouTube channel, then I would obviously cut out any of that. This is the magic that you don't tend to see on the channel, or anybody's channel for that matter. Yes. It's funny, there seems to be different lag in different countries. The UK viewers are jumping straight on the chat and saying, yep, no vocal or extra noise, and then everybody else is putting that in the chat about a minute later. Why is... There we go. I've got a YouTube studio thing in the background that's unable to connect to chat. Like, why? It's your chat, YouTube. What are you people doing in there? There we go. By the way, this is a good time for me to do the typical YouTube prayer of like, share, and subscribe. If you've not already hit the like button, please do. It does help us to spread the word. And there we go. Also, yeah, if you've not subscribed to the channel, please do, but don't do it just because you feel you have to. I'm not bothered about us having 1 million subscribers as long as you all actually genuinely want to come and hear what I have to say. So yeah, if you're really enjoying these streams, and not just these streams, but anything that we do on the channel, then do subscribe because there's lots more coming. Let's find out. Oh, that's got more low end. Compared to our reference now, we've got way more low end. There we go. It's funny, yeah. My friend Nick says she wasn't subscribed and now she is. That's absolutely fine. Like I was saying, genuinely, seriously, if you're not going to watch all the videos, it's absolutely fine. There's been a thing going around at the moment of loads of young, small YouTube channels trying to get, like, let's get each other to 1,000 subs so that we can get paid. It's like, that's not going to work for you. Because what's going to happen is you're going to have 1,000 subscribers that don't watch your videos, which means that your overall statistics are going to be absolutely in the toilet. You're never going to get any money because then anyone who does watch your videos has a thing called RPM, which is essentially what your advertising dollars, your advertising on your channel is worth. And that's based on things like how many people are watching your videos and that kind of thing. If there's nobody watching your videos, you don't get paid. Simple as that. Like, just because of the content that I make, and because it's quite specific, generally to something like Reaper, on those videos I actually do quite well in terms of ad revenue because people tune in specifically to see that. But if people are just subscribing to a channel for no reason, that doesn't help. It's funny. I mean, if it's one person, yeah, cool, but I could pay tomorrow to get like 500,000 subscribers on this channel. My channel would be dead overnight. It's funny because then, yeah, YouTube's got a very complicated algorithm where it would then look for, like, well, why is this guy suddenly got 500,000 subscribers, but he's not getting any more views? I mean, 10 years ago, they didn't have all those algorithms in place. But now they do, and they're smart. So, best thing to do, arguably, is what we've been doing all along, which is just try and be good. Anyway, let's finish up this track now. Just going to listen to it from where it kicks in at the very end. Cool, liking that ending there. And everything's thick, everything's full, nothing hurts my ears. And our reference is a little bit tame in comparison, but the volume's roughly the same considering I've pulled their volume down by 4.5 dP. I do appreciate the compliment from one of our members of the chat. I think the last thing that I notice is that the kick and the low end on the Epica track are really kind of tight and punchy and going and ours has got a bit of a super low sub thing. I don't know if any of you can hear that, especially if you're listening on headphones. This is where SonarWorks really helps me because I've got this big sub bump that SonarWorks is adding into my headphones so I can hear super low end sub stuff. And without that, I wouldn't be able to hear the kick drums going whoop, 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 whoop. So what I've done there, I don't know if you can hear this if I solo it. Yeah, that's really making my my head go. If I turn this band off, yeah, there's some real super low stuff in there. That's cool, but because the song's going so fast, it's just causing problems. So if I just take everything out below, say 40 Hz, I don't have any sub drops or anything in the track. So this should really clear the low end range out. Suddenly the low end feels really light. So I can probably push the low end quite a bit now. Funnily enough, I thought it was getting a bit loud then, because I've been pushing the low end, pushing that low end, and then pushing. And that did make everything feel a bit loud, so I just clicked the learn threshold there just to see if it would automatically change things, and it brought my overall level down by 1.5 decibels. There we go. And the high end just almost feels a little too clear compared to their mix, which could be me and the way that I like a clear high end. Again, I'm just going to... You guys can't hear this on Sonarworks, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank the treble on my end, which happens after what you hear. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so by me absolutely blasting myself in the ears with high end to compare the two, suddenly when I compare the two, yeah, it's I'll put that back to human levels now. And yeah, suddenly just by taking a bit out of the high boost there in the Pultec. Cool. I'm just going to play the track one more time as the final version of the track, and then I think that's time for us to sign out. And I'm pretty happy with how this has gone. So a 3-hour mix session yesterday and a 1.5-hour revisions and mastering session today. And this is something I think I'm going to play it in the car and play it on the stereo downstairs, but I think this is something that I'd be happy to release to, major release. So yeah, I'm quite happy, and I very much appreciated the feedback that I've been getting from the chat. So definitely going to do some more mixing and mastering sessions next week, probably on a different genre, and we're going to keep changing genres just to keep it interesting, keep it fresh. Because we'll find slightly different approaches on different genres, although a lot of it will stay the same because the general principles and practices don't change, but you do have to put yourself in a certain headspace for each genre and what you're trying to achieve. So one more time, Porcelain by Disenchanted.
So intense, I might
Awesome. I think with that, I am done, because typical engineer, producer, mixer, if I don't say I'm done and just leave this now, I could end up picking at this for days, weeks, months. And as the saying goes, we are never finished. We just leave things alone. we hit the deadline. We have to let it go. And that's what I'm going to do here. So, yes. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you've not already hit the like button, please do. It really helps. And stay tuned. There's going to be a proper video up, hopefully, on... Oh, it's Sunday already, isn't it? I'll try my best to get one out tomorrow. Then later in the week, we'll do something probably back to pop punk or possibly acoustic indie-ish stuff. There's loads I've got to go at. I'm just checking my folder, yeah. But I already did this advert last time. So yes, thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.